Let's resume our sessions, and I will invite you to get back to your seats. And if I understood well, is have a lack of caffeine, and you have the necessary caffeine, you will get it through this panel. It's a unique panel.
As a Belgian, I'm increasingly frustrated sitting here. I'm frustrated with what I experience to be a catch-22 discussion on Europe. We must do it together, but we can't do it together. Therefore, let some big countries take care of it, and then Europe can fund. Je vous dis, ça ne va pas marcher.
I'm telling you it's not going to work.
Bolder, more creative, and I was thinking, are we talking, because we said in the beginning, l'Europe, qu'est-ce qu'on veut dire?
L'Europe, what do you mean with Europe?
Talking about the Europe of Jean Monnet or the Europe of Paul-Henri Spaak? Jean Monnet disait, l'Europe, c'est...
Jean Monnet said Europe is the answer to the crisis. It will be the sum of all the solutions to a crisis. And I think this is our challenge for today. Can we, with this crisis, move forward? Otherwise, we'll have to go to Paul-Henri Spaak. We have two types of countries. We have small countries. And the countries we don't know, they are small yet. So we have to go back and to Europe of, as seen by Paul-Henri Spaak.
There is not a matter of choice, but a matter of must, because we face this challenge of defense industry and defense spending. We just committed ourselves in Europe to 500, 600 billion euros a year, defense and security and resilience spending. If we do it the old way, we're never going to be able to fund it, without breaking democracies, because there's a huge amount of choice there behind it. If we can't do it together, we won't win efficiency, because by doing it together, we have about 30% waste compared to doing it alone. So it's not a question of should we, it's a question we have to actually, otherwise we're throwing good money away. We can't do that, throw good money away. We also have to take care not just of NATO, we have to take care of Ukraine, and we have the hope, and I would say, I believe it's more than hope, it's ambition, to say we are going to come out at the other end with a more robust, strategically autonomous, a stronger Europe with its own industrial and technology base that can give the future generations the freedom to make their own choices. That's our common duty. To do it together is a duty. So to discuss all that, we have an excellent panel. I'm not going to introduce them very extensively, but we have the commissioner, obviously, who already spoke inspiringly this morning, Andris Kubilius, who is defense but also space commissioner. It's an interesting combination because it reminds us that when we say defense, it's actually much more than defense. It's also technology, it's also markets and digital, and that by definition is going to be EU. By definition, because it already is EU. So it's again not a question of can we do EU, we will have to do EU. And then we have two non-EU people, which is also very interesting, and historically, I think, a very, very attractive proposition after the calamity that was Brexit, which we have to undo. That is also something we have to do, undo that calamity. And we're going to have to do it in a very creative, innovative way. And we have Robbie Boyd, who is a retired Brigadier General, board member of a very interesting initiative, which he will say a few words on, but only a few. Defense, Security and Resilience Bank Development Group. It's a long name, he'll explain. And then we have Edward Stringer, who is a retired pilot from the RAF, Air Marshal, not from the Army. He said to me in the booklet, says the Army, no can do. I'm RAF, okay? Think tanker, policy exchange, and a former Director General of the Defense Academy. And then digitally, I see the image and I see it in front of me. Een heel goede namiddag to Kasia Ollongren, who was a former defense minister and vice prime minister of the Netherlands. Thank you all very much. I only will have 2 questions, and I really want time for questions from the audience. So only 2 questions from me. In addressing this, we must do, but we can't do, I have 2 dimensions that I would like to do vis-à-vis the challenge, which is common defense industry and technology. Yeah? That's the topic. Vis-à-vis the challenge, I have 2 dimensions. One is the top-down one, and the other is the bottom-up one. The top-down is the role of the governments. The EU, the national governments, third countries, coalitions. In that big challenge that we have, who is going to do what? So can we get out of the binary choice? Is it EU or is it not EU? Can we say it's actually perhaps a combination? Yeah? And who is going to do what? Given that it is more than just armament, it's also security, it's also infrastructure, it's technology. Who is going to do what? What is needed? And then, as a sub-question, what are we going to have to stop doing? Yeah? Because we waste a lot of money. We have too many weapon systems. They're not in interoperability and so on and so forth. What are the weapon systems that we are going to have to cancel? Yeah? Can we name the hard choices? So maybe start with the Commissioner from the EU perspective.
Well, and we were promised that questions will be such that we can give, short answers. So I see that as more difficult, task. You say must, I don't know how I must to give a short answer to that. It's more difficult to create, common European defense to answer to that question. But I will try very briefly. If I would have all the answers, I don't know. Then it will be boring for me to be a commissioner. So really, I do not have all the answers. Commission just started to be more active in defense if to compare with previous period of time. So we are learning by doing. But in my view, first of all, we need to understand that in defense, we have this dual structure. Member states will stay most important players in defense, and most important players not only in decision-making on defense, but also in financing the defense. So defense finances, majority of defense finances will come from national taxpayers. But, and that's very good that now in NATO they agreed on 3.5 or 5 as we want to call. Really, if that promise will be fulfilled, which we need to be realistic about that. So nevertheless, quite a huge money will start to come from member states, from national taxpayers into defense. What Draghi was saying in his report, the biggest problem with our defense industry is its fragmentation. And what some experts are saying, if there will be such a development that only national money will increase to be spent on defense, national governments will increase, then this fragmentation can also just to increase. And, so the way how we can avoid such kind of problem is really to have quite a strong European Union level programs which would allow us to incentivize member states to go for joint procurement, joint development, and everything else which would diminish this fragmentation. So I want to stress the word incentivizing. I do not see how we can, with some kind of regulation, to say, member states, forget about your own, decisions. Now everything will be decided by us in Commission. The only way to have such a development, it would be to have Donald Trump, as European president, whatever, which perhaps also will not happen. So let's be realistic. And here I would, I don't want to continue on that because we need to understand that here is a challenge for us to have on EU level both legal powers and financial powers to do that job. Now, legal powers maybe are coming. One of them is safe loans with some kind of financial powers. Second one is coming also so-called EDIP program, European Defense Industry Program, which gives a lot of new legal instruments to incentivize member states to go for joint procurement and also to assist industries to expand and so on and so on. But EDIP will have quite a limited financial power, at the moment, only 1.5 billion euros for next 3 years till next MFF. And what does it mean? You can imagine 3% of GDP or 3.5% of GDP spent by EU member states on defense would bring annually 600 billion euros additionally into defense. So if we have only 1.5 billion to incentivize member states to change, their, way of procurement, of development, and to go more for joint procurement, definitely that will be not enough. So I am almost telling you all my speeches, which now I am trying to convince the college to bring much more of financial resources into next MFF for defense, saying that at least 10% of value, 10% size of subsidies for incentivizing joint procurement would be exactly what we would need to have in next MFF, and that would be more or less around of 100 billion, instead of 10 billion which we had till now in this MFF. So that's my, I don't know if short, but I would say very, pragmatic answer to your question.
So, but what about the sub-question about what should we stop doing? In other words, now that we need to spend more, we need to focus the spending. So there are choices to be made in terms of systems and technologies. Is this also where the EU comes in for you?
Well, again, there are plenty of things which we need to stop doing, and we need to learn, how to do new things. I would, maybe I will not answer your question directly, but we should stop thinking that, I'm not a military guy. There are 2 military persons, I am afraid, I will be kicked out from my, chair here. But we should stop thinking that the next war will look like, our last wars which we were fighting on the European continent, like Second World War, what we can see in Hollywood. What we can see in Ukraine, defense war against Russia, with millions of drones. Ukrainians said me recently they will need for defense of front line 1,200 kilometers this year 4 million drones. They created Death Valley, 15 kilometers wide, along all the front line. And if traditional tank is coming into that zone, 6 minutes and he is done. It's done, So I immediately calculated if, Ukrainians need for 1,200 kilometers, 4 million drones. If DX would come to Lithuania and we would face, Russian aggression, we have 900 kilometers of what I call sensitive borders with Russia and Belarus. So simple arithmetics, we need to have ability to use 3 million drones. I asked Ukrainians immediately, so what would be your advice? Should we start to produce, should we procure and keep in our stockpiles? They said it's nonsense, because in 2 months, the drones which you're using now are becoming obsolete. So then, it's totally different question, that you need to have, and that was the advice. Teams of the people who are ready, who are prepared, engineers, digital guys, operators, who are ready to scale up, you need to have something in your stockpiles of components. But this is, again, totally different approach to the war. And when I saw how Ukrainians are doing, this, what they call drone, army of drone, I understood that we need to learn much more, not how to produce drone, which engineers can do, very quickly. We need to learn how to create the whole ecosystem around that, which means, totally different procurement. Everything, is different. And that is what, what in some way we need to abandon that, way of thinking that we can stay on what we understand till now, as a background, and we need to start to look how we can change a lot of things. And here, I was really very positively surprised, and I talked with UK Defense Minister on your recent whatever, defense review, strategic, I don't remember how it's called, but where British, strategic review of defense policy or something like that, where Brits introduced very clear concept with very good title, 20-40-40. I mean, 20% of targets to be hit in the future, of where Brits will participate, to be hit by conventional heavy weapons, artillery, tanks, and so on. 40% by the light kamikaze drones, and 40% by heavy drones and missiles. This is exactly what Ukrainians have now in their statistics. 80% of targets are hit by drones. So, maybe Britain can show us a good example how to change our thinking.
Okay, that's the perfect question then. You want to go for that? You want to go for that? So, the role of governments, the choice of weapon systems, and the changing nature of technology and so on. And
Malheureusement, mon français, ce n'est pas très bon.
Unfortunately, my French is not great. My mother used to be a French teacher. So, please excuse me if I speak English.
Right bits of that SDR, and we're still at the stage where the rhetoric sounds great from the Brits, but here I am sucking up to a French audience. The reality is trailing a long way behind. I'll give you some examples in a second. So I thought I'd come at this three ways. The first is a sort of sit rep. Where is NATO at the moment? Well, the huge threat is the position of Trump, and this really, we've all got to get our heads around this. I just sense back in the UK, the stuff that came out earlier on this year from Vance, Hegseth, and Trump, shifts the whole tectonic plates of NATO. And yet people walk up and down the high street as if they're not actually manifestly a lot less safe today than they were yesterday. But there is an opportunity in that, which came out from one of our speakers yesterday. But the organizing principle of NATO, if you like, was the Americans will lead. If it was a sports team, America provides the coach, it provides the captain on the pitch, and it provides all the money for the backroom staff that allows the whole game to take place in the first place. Each country then provides maybe a defender or a striker or a flashy footballer, but can't do the whole thing. Now you take away the coach that tells you how you're going to play the game, you take away the captain on the pitch, and you take away all the backroom staff that in military parlance we would call the strategic enablers, and you're just left with a bunch of thick footballers that don't really know how they're going to go and take on the opposition. And that is the position that NATO will find itself in if Euro-NATO finds itself in. It's bought a lot of quite sexy equipment, but it hasn't got the brain, the spinal column, or really bits of the skeleton to allow those major muscle groups to actually be effective acting in coordination. So that's the position that we are in today. Second point, you said you wanted, what can we stop doing? Right, let's stop wasting money. And as European taxpayers, we should all be up in arms about the amount of money that gets wasted. And this is where I'm going to link back to that comment about 20-40-40, which comes from Rowley Walker, head of the British Army. It's a good idea, and it does show that we should be learning the lessons from Ukraine. Let's leap to the reality. Over the last couple of decades, the UK has invested £3.2 billion. So that's 3.5 billion euros, 3.5 thousand million euros on two programs that will equate to between 40 and 60 drones, depending on how many we get. They're just plastic aeroplanes with a lawnmower motor in the back, really. They're not stealthy, they're not survivable, they'll last a couple of days on even the Ukrainian battlefield. That's economically and operationally bankrupt as a concept. But it's the illogical extension of the way we've bought manned platforms, and we're buying these drones in the same way we'd buy F-35s or blah, this, that, and the other. And I could give other examples. So the UK does like to go around the world and talk about its SDR and what it's done. And it does like to say it's got the 5th or 6th largest defence budget in the world, but the British Army at the moment has 14 guns. No, that wasn't an error from the translator's booth. 14, 1-4. So the profligacy, the way we fail to husband kit, the way we just don't get the basics right, that's what we have to stop doing. And we do that at that institutional level, going back to the answer I gave, point one, because fragmentation, so to pick up on the point from the Commissioner, an excellent point from the Commissioner, and let's put some numbers on it. You can classify weapon systems into 10 major types. If you like, aircraft carriers, escorts, nuclear submarines, conventional subs, battle tanks, there's about 10, fighters, bombers, blah. The Americans produce 34 different types across those 10 classes. Across Europe, we do 179. That's 179 non-recurring costs, 179 research and development design programs, all of which cost the same as the Americans to design a tank or whatever. But then you buy 3 or 4 at the end. And you see that in Ukraine, where Europe has given more than the Americans, but whose donation was most effective? Because the Americans give 2 types of howitzers, and they deliver them in the hundreds, and they each take 1 type of shell. I think, therefore, Europe has given 8 types of 155mm howitzer, and they all require their own separate type of ammunition. So why standardise on 155, the width of it? So we need to think this one through, and this is where I think the EU comes in, because moving on to my third answer, what can we do about this? NATO isn't going to sort these problems. NATO can start sorting them in the way that it's done in my own background is air power and flying. Because aeroplanes mingle, you can't separate a little bit of airspace, then we have to have the same radios, we have to refuel the same way. And so actually NATO has done a really good job since 1949 in standardising. It now has to do that much more across the other domains. So we only have 1 type of 155mm shell, because the big generals around here, and there are several in the audience, will know logistics is what enables you to fight wars. And when you have to find a way of putting 10 different types of 155mm shell, the fact that your howitzer might be 3% more effective as a gun than the one next door is irrelevant compared to, can I maintain them? Can I supply them? Can I keep them going in the field? So let's stop chasing technical perfection. Let's look at how real-world generals would fight. So that's where I'm going to end the opening bit of my remarks. I'm also sucking up to a French audience by saying, if I refer to where I started, this is a big threat, but also an opportunity for NATO. This might be the time that Allied command transformation comes into its own. Because what is this if not a massive transformation for NATO and the defence of Europe, that geographic landmass? That's a French 4-star general who's been running Allied command transformation since Denis Mercier. I think was the first one who started that off in, I'm going back, it's well over 10 years now. So there's a great opportunity there to put yourself in the point of view of the European Supreme Allied Commander Europe and start thinking through what a real operation would look like if you didn't have the Americans. What are the things I'm now going to need to build? A lot of them are in space. What are my command and control arrangements? What are my command, control, communication? How do I do intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance without the American hopper feeding a whole load of data in at the top? Europe can do these things. It just needs to work out how to do them together. And my final point is, because all of these things are political questions, you heard from Declan earlier on, when industries find it difficult, there are at war with Chinese who are using 3 Chinese warfare. Is everyone familiar with that? Legal, psychological, and informational. Well, NATO won't deal with that, but the EU can. So pulling Allied Command Transformation in with what the Commissioner to my right is going to do, and let's take it as a project. How actually do we, if we don't have the Americans, come together as Europeans to be such a credible porcupine to Russia out to the east that it doesn't even think about trying? Thank you.
So far, I think what we've heard is that the EU should do much more strategic kind of bottom, from the top to the bottom, think it through, coordinate it, make your choices, and then incentivize. That's what Europe could do. I'm keen to hear a bit of the perspective coming from the Netherlands. With Kaisha, I hope you can hear us.
I can.
Yes, so the Netherlands was mentioned here in passing, because there was also the question of can we do common funding and common European debt, because everybody's looking for money now that we have to spend so much more money. So what's the situation there, and what is your thought on the topic about how do we get where we need to be, and how do we do it in a European coordinated way? How does that look from your end?
Thank you very much. And I'm also going to speak in English. And I'm very sorry not to be there. I would have wanted to be in Normandy with you, but it was just impossible. So thank you for allowing me to join online. And please don't ask me to defend the Dutch position on the common funding, because my political position is really a different one. And there are also people in the Netherlands, including the president of our central bank, who have taken a different position on this. They say, yes, of course, you always have to be very careful if you do common lending, because everything you lend has to be paid back at some point, which means next generations will have to bear the burden. But in the case of security, it is so evident that we have to do this in common that it just could allow for joint borrowing. So my position would be that it's a very good step that Europe is taking in that direction. It's still not, of course, really joint borrowing. And I hope that countries will use it. And I would advocate when the next Dutch government will be formed after the elections, that we also have to pay for the 3.5% for defense. And it will probably be a combination of raising taxes, cutting budgets, and borrowing money. Which is a smart thing to do, because if we are not secure, if we don't deter our main threat, we are in deep trouble. And that brings me to the points that have just been made. And I must say, I agree very much with the previous speakers and also with your introduction. Our biggest threat is Russia. I mean, military threat. Russia is actually preparing to do more than the war in Ukraine. Russia has been turned into really a war machine with a war economy, with huge numbers of ammunition and capabilities coming out of their factories. And because they are an autocracy, they can do this much more easily, of course, than we can. So we have to be very smart about this. And instead of considering our structures, our institutions, and the fact that we are many countries that are in different combinations in NATO, in the EU, in regional partnerships, we have to turn that into our strength. I think that is very, very important, that we realize that we have the skills, we can raise the money, and we are stronger and we are innovative because our economies are inherently also stronger than the Russian economy is. And now that we have been faced with not only the war in Ukraine, but also the threat of the United States pulling out of NATO, which we seem to have been buying time. I think this outcome of the NATO summit is positive in that regard. But still, what we're looking at is preparing for doing much more within NATO, taking over positions, US troops, US capabilities. So we really have to be very serious about this. And now that the NATO summit is over and that the budgets will increase, we have to spend it smartly, and we're not. So I heard, we are too nationalist about this. I think it's really important that we stop being nationalist about this and that we start thinking, as we do with other markets, about a European defense market, about European defense industry. And I know that this is exactly what the commissioner is working on. And as a defense minister, I was very much in favor of having a commissioner for defense. And I'm very happy with the plans that the commissioner has presented, because this is exactly what we need to do. And if we succeed in that, then we will have the possibility to take over from the Americans within NATO, and not only their troops, but also with new capabilities. And one of the questions was, what should we then concretely do? And in earlier stages, the European Commission, when thinking about the white paper and everything that should be done, talked about flagship projects. And they were very widely defined. So Air Shield, for instance, was named as labeled as a flagship project. I think in the final version, it disappeared. But I think it was a good way to think, but you have to make it much more concrete, because an Air Shield it's nothing. I mean, there are so many layers in an air shield. So you have to be much more concrete, and you have to think within NATO, within the capability gaps and plans, what do we really need in Europe, where we are at this moment completely dependent on the United States. And then, for instance, you could say, well, air surveillance is an area where we have too little, where we could use new technologies, where we have strong industries, and where we could create a European capability. And there are many more examples like this one, and it only requires political will, not necessarily from 27 or 31 countries, but from a group of countries who join forces and create this capability, which also will, of course, give an incentive, because you will scale up to a level that no single European country can do on its own, even not the big European countries, because these are really big and expensive projects. And the second thing, I think, also, if you think about how to spend it, new technology innovation, I think, is vital, and I couldn't agree more. So you have to rethink the whole concept behind the procurement of these capabilities, because a drone, has been said, it's going to be outdated within weeks or months. So you have to have a different relationship to industry, a different relationship to your partners. They have to be equal. They have to be on board, and you have to use their expertise all the time while creating a feedback loop with the user of the products. And in this case, of course, this feedback loop must be with Ukraine. And we also have to realize that the Ukrainian armed forces are the only European armed forces who have combat experience with the new technology and with the old weapon systems in combination with the drones on every level. And that is extremely important to us, which is, and that would be my last point, that the best we can do at this moment for European security is funding Ukraine directly into their defense industries. They have the production capacity, but they need the funding. And we will, there will be, at some point, we will get back everything that we invest into this if they succeed in stopping the Russian invasion. And the perspective of membership for Ukraine, membership of the EU, and as far as I'm concerned, also of NATO, is also vital to our future security.
Thank you very much. It's a complex exercise to get right with the starting proposition that we have. And the bridge to Ukraine, which should be integral to the common approach that we have, is a natural bridge to the UK. It's something that wasn't really touched upon by Edward, so the kind of a country positioning. Maybe you can include that in your answer, how you look at that and how the UK positioning.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. But I'm going to correct you slightly, because I'm another Irish troublemaker. We had one yesterday.
I do apologise.
We had one this morning, just before us. There's Declan. It's good to see. But also, but I'm a Northern Irish one, and I live in Belgium, so that makes me even more of a troublemaker, old friend. The reason I say that, and of course that makes me indestructible to Brexit because I'm a Northern Irishman, so that's even more. So, but the reason I say that is yes, and I can still answer your UK question. I served 35 years in the British Army, of course, and finished my time at NATO, and then spent time in the innovation industry, and that in itself meant that I started to reach out into two areas. But what I wanted to do is pick up on a few threads, because I want to make the point that, and I build on something Declan said this morning, we have to be bold with our solutions for what we're about to do. And that might not mean just cooperating within an EU framework if we want to get the financing mechanisms together that we need to get together to solve the problem we've got now. And I'll articulate why in a second. But I want to pick up what Doug Lute said yesterday, because I think it was the best and most eloquent description of the NATO summit. Because he went back to the basics. And the basics are Article 1 of the NATO Charter, the first thing that was written down, which was we are effectively upholding the values that we wish to do for the world that are cemented in the United Nations. That's the way that NATO looks up to do this. It looks globally as well. And it has 38 partner nations because of that. democracies, if you like, around the world, or good guys, depending on how you want to class them. But also then it takes you down a journey as well as you read through that charter that I've spent my life doing. So I fought on battlefields all over the world because of Article 5 was called, in support of our American friends and partners in NATO that sacrificed the blood of my soldiers, both from Ireland and from the UK. And we did that for the United States, and we honoured that promise in the same way that we all know the United States will honour that promise back. And I don't think there is any doubt. I think, having been through in NATO the first Trump administration, where the media picked up on elements of doubt, having sat in the room with Dana and others while Angela Merkel effectively ran around on a 1+1 North Atlantic Council meeting and held NATO together in 8 minutes when Donald Trump was posturing and being unorthodox last time. I don't see that now. I see a different set of messaging. There has been no other messaging from the United States this time around other than we are here and we are in NATO. And that's what, as Doug mentioned yesterday, was the message that came out yesterday, because what actually came out yesterday was we all, however, have to contribute. It's no longer about cooperation between elements. It's about contributing to the greater defense of what it is we're trying to achieve. So let's not take our eye, if you're a military guy, on the two up, which is the world, and from a European perspective, the one up to protect Europe, European high north, the European Arctic, the Mediterranean, the North Atlantic, and so on and so forth, which is covered for our European defence by NATO. So that's what I want to say there. There's something else. When you look at those articles, Article 3 is about resilience, being resilient enough, and I've been through that too and watched that develop. Article 4 is about watching your borders and making sure we have enough strategic enablers to understand and be safe because things are happening on our borders. Now that is Ukraine today. So we have to have capabilities that stretch all the way through there, and we have to be robust in order to do it. That creates, as the Commissioner's already said, quite a high demand signal for financing in order to get ourselves back under the basic principle that if the United States of America is engaged elsewhere in the world, that could have been Iran very recently, and it most certainly could be China, Europe is able to stand on its own feet and defend Europe from, in this case, Russia, but also China as well, as we've heard. That is the fundamental principle, whether you are angry with the United States or not, that's fundamental. And I think that's really important as a scene setter. So we're at war with China, yes, in its own way, but we're certainly at war with Russia at the moment here in Europe. NATO carries on. It's doing what it does on a daily basis. It's not a question of us, one or the other. It functions every single day and provides that deterrence. And what I would point out is on a nuclear side of things, because we started off in a nuclear submarine, when the United States says it's going to have to go elsewhere potentially, there isn't actually a shortage of nuclear weapons. The United States can cover Europe still with deterrence, along with the UK deterrent, as part of NATO's nuclear planning group. And it can still do the rest of the world. And that's an unfortunate thing to say, because I'm sure we'd all not like nuclear weapons, but it can do it. And remember, deterrence starts with those horrible devices at the top and is also then merged with conventional warfare. Because if we have a nuclear war, conventional warfare continues somewhere else and has to be around anyway. So SACEUR commands that through a command and control system at NATO that is ready to do that across Europe and elsewhere. So again, I'm sort of pushing us up a little bit in the way that we consider this. And NATO didn't just release, or didn't just say, let's contribute more. It actually released things like an industrial production plan involving lots of European nations coming together, looking at exactly the same sort of problems of acquisition, exactly the same sort of other areas we're trying to cover here. So it's a bigger picture. So it's about contribution. And what I'd also say here is when you start to then stack up all of those things that we do have to do to be robust again and deter again as Europeans, if the Americans are engaged elsewhere, what that means is you start putting the bill together. And 5% of GDP, if you're the British as well, and you've done a strategic defence review, as Ed's mentioned, it's unaffordable as it currently stands. As it currently stands, it's unaffordable. moving to 5% GDP is a statement of actually, it's a statement to say we intend to contribute and we intend to try and solve this problem. But what I really want to get to here is if we are starting to look at the rest of the financial mechanisms, as we've discussed with industry, as we've discussed with investment in our industry here and developing it, we've got to look for a brand new way of financing it. All of our financial mechanisms are designed for peacetime over long procurement periods. They were designed so that we had time to get ourselves together, and this isn't the case. We heard this morning from the Ukrainians that the Russians now have one of the best armies in the world, and if they stopped in Ukraine, they could be coming next year. German intelligence told us last week they would be on the border in 5 years. And that is, and again, another logical way of looking at how the Russian economy is geared up towards replacing its threat. So it continues to be that threat. So we have to look at it from that side. IISS published a paper recently about how much they thought it would cost for us to do exactly this Europe to step up if the Americans are engaged elsewhere. It is in the region of trillion, possibly 2 trillion, not the same amount of money that we can generate right now and are trying to brilliantly through some of the mechanisms that are here. It's far more than that if we want to stay where we are and achieve those articles we have to achieve. So what I'd like to say then is, how do you therefore look at those new financial mechanisms, and how do we therefore bring something in that can cover the next part of the question, which was what do we have to give up if we can't afford all of this? Well, do you know what the simple answer is? We don't. And the reason we don't is because if we stand together based on Article 1 with our global allies around the world, we can actually start a new institution. And Article 2 in NATO says we all agree that we will protect our free institutions in order to generate enough money, essentially, to pay for our defence. Now, as Europeans, we've been a bit naughty at that. And because of that, we could start a new institution. And that institution, which could be something like the DSR Bank, it doesn't have to be that, could be global. And what we would end up doing then is taking, let's say, 32 NATO allies, 38 NATO partners together, putting capital into an institution in the same way the World Bank and the ERB functions, but designed specifically for defence. The first one out of 44 multinational lending institutions in the world for defence. That means you have a capital base of potentially trillions. If you have a capital base of trillion plus, what you can do is incredible. And what we're looking at doing is having 3 services. A nation buys its way as a member. It takes, therefore, we are able to take that capital and generate AAA credit-rated loans back to the nation. Now, going back to the Italian point this morning, if you're an Italian, and if I go to an Italian and say, I'm going to give you a AAA credit-rated loan for defence, then by goodness, it's a really happy event as he does all of the waving and everything else to give a go at the Italians. So we can generate that for nations in order to not have to. If the UK needs a new nuclear deterrent, which it will do, and it can't afford it, a lot of capital can be generated to fund it over a long period of time at very cheap rates. The next thing you can do is you can take that and you can fund companies from nations. So say Rheinmetall wanted to buy Volkswagen to increase production, and the German government came and said, could we have a very cheap loan? Because industry can't get cheap loans. We could give them a very cheap loan to do that quickly and allow that to happen. And then the final thing, and this is the clever bit, is that utilizing all of that capital, we can awaken and bring in all of the commercial banks and the pension funds to invest in our industry and invest in our innovation companies with tens of billions, because we will provide guarantees from the capital in the bank to those banks. And if you think that's not working, the DSR Bank, Defence, Security and Resilience Bank concept is already now, and here's the scoop, being invested in order to get this moving by commercial banks who were not investing in defence until recently, and commercial banks here in Europe. So what? To start this off and to move quickly, all the bank needs is a home here in Europe, which is under discussion, a financial centre, And given all the work that's been done already, I think, believe it or not, it will be up and running by the end of 2026 and helping defence and solving your problem about not having to lose anything if that's the choice.
Okay, thank you so much. Robert has answered 2 questions in one. Because the second question, and time is running very fast and people have to catch a train, and we really want the audience to ask questions. So I will ask the 3 other panelists to say one proposal in 1 minute about the bottom up. Yeah? Is it the financial market innovation? Is it industry organization? Is it research and development? So from the other side up, the incentive coming from the market, what is, if you're in charge, what's your priority that we need to innovate, change, or whatever variation you want to add? Maybe Edward, you can go first.
ESG, risk and regulation. Have a go at those, hammer those, and it would be good to have some cover from the EU.
That's very clear and I think very relevant. Thanks for that. Commissioner?
Well, I think that we still need to finalize some kind of basic for real job to be done. And basic means that we need to understand what is a real demand and what kind of supply we can have, and where are what kind of production and supply we can have, where are supply problems. And then really we can have the final question, how to finance. But first of all, we need to understand what we need to have in order to calculate the cost. So we are sometimes a little bit still shaky. NATO concluded so-called capability targets. Now we are collecting that information to have so-called aggregated demand. And we are starting also to speak with the industries how we can look into production and supply in order to understand really the whole process and how much it will cost.
Thank you. Gasha, the last word is for you before Q&A.
Well, I would say, agreeing with both speakers, but I would say, where does Europe lag behind others? And that is in the area of the new technologies, broadly. So really AI, autonomous systems, drones, but also space. So we have to create the right incentives for these new technologies to thrive in Europe instead of leaving Europe at some point and thrive elsewhere.
Which brings us back to the panel before us, capital market integration, barriers to innovation, and so on. They're all part of the same challenge. Therefore, the EU is really, really a critical player to enable other players. Avec ça, vous avez la parole, mesdames et messieurs.
Now you have the floor, ladies and gentlemen. I know that we have quite a lot of people in the room who have a burning question to ask, I'm sure. Come on, yeah.
To ask you about the question of the single market, because when we talk about modern defense, we are talking mainly and more about the dual-use goods and services. If having no perspective of community-based funding, we will consolidate national budgets around this project and maybe coalition of willing, the second best solution. How do you see any risk for integrity of the single market here? And how do you want to address the problem, the possible problem of the decomposition of the single market with such an enormous amount of money putting on the market in the end?
Do you ask that to somebody specific in the panel?
Volunteers.
Sorry?
Volunteers.
Volunteers.
Well, I would answer very simply. Single market in defense cannot disintegrate because there is no single market in defense. So we need to create it, first of all, and that's what Draghi was very much outspoken. That our defense industry is very much fragmented. Our defense policies, of course, also are very much individualized, national ones, and that is why governments are not keen to go into single market principles in defense. There is this article 346, from the Treaty on Functioning of European Union, which speaks about national whatever, security clause that member states, because of their specific concerns about security, cannot implement single market principles, which is a problem. I don't know, I am not dreaming that we shall change the treaty, but I am looking how we can convince member states not to use that article. Because definitely for our defense capabilities, for our defense industry, defense, single defense market or whatever, how we shall call it, is very much needed, because now we are not using the power of market to build our industrial competitiveness. So that's my answer. I mean, I am not so sure that, it will be easy, especially that still we have, national governments responsible for defense, national money spent for defense, and national industries looking for, in some way, for support by national governments. So how we shall be able to find this way of changing the thinking that, for us, it's much more important independence of Europe in defense than independence of member states. Well, maybe it sounds, a little bit tricky, but I feel that, in some way, internal contradiction. That member states, for time being, they are much more concerned about their independence, national independence in defense and how to build defense. And that is why it's so difficult to move ahead with developing added value of European Union. And it's I am always saying that in defense, and especially when we're talking with defense industry, it would be so good for us to learn from what we managed to achieve in space. When I have two portfolios, in my responsibility, in space where, well, despite the fact that we lost some competition to Elon Musk, but we have very good achievements with our space constellations like Galileo, like Copernicus, which are the best in the world. Now we're building Iris Square. There are some private initiatives very good, moving ahead. And what is important is that those constellations we built as European ones. We managed to agree both in the Commission and in the Council and in the European Space Agency, which consists of member states or European countries. We managed to agree on common European projects. To do the same in defense, it looks, like not impossible, but really much more difficult.
Autre question.
Another question. Here in front.
Professor, dank u. We know that the state officials are the best value creators. They know how to spend money. I'm an entrepreneur in private equity, and Europe looks for a defense industry, a European defense industry, not national, Europe. So, Commissioner, there are a couple of investors in this room. I request 1 billion euros and as equity and plus debt, so that we can consolidate the industry and make it professional, make it efficient, and also invest in R&D, in high tech, and plus, as we know, the Americans are the biggest military defense industry in the world with the Chinese. Let's also, and we have not mentioned that over this weekend, cooperate with our great friends from Canada. And as you know, the Canadians, we had our Prime Minister last Monday in Brussels. You met our Canadian Defense Minister. Canada is now focusing on the European Union. Because after all those centuries, the best partner, their neighbors have lost confidence. And with our new Prime Minister McCartney, who is a bit British, a bit Canadian, a bit European, an investment banker, and like me, a private equity man. So, perfect timing to join us in a new defense fund. And please, don't give the money to the sovereign wealth funds. Okay. Give us to us.
So the question,
Professor,
the question.
I'm asking a question. I'm asking for 1 billion euros. Thank you.
For a defense fund. Yeah, for defense. So basically it's an argument which we could have made in our bottom-up, that the way to integrate is bring in private capital because they will look for the best possible return, and that's going to be scale, that's going to be European.
So I'll come in on this one. So I'll spare the Europeans money on this one. I'll do a world perspective. You want just 1 billion, do you? I was asked 2 weeks ago in the United Kingdom for £2 billion by a venture capitalist in a conversation we were having. He said, I need £2 billion now, or 6 of the best innovative companies in the United Kingdom on artificial intelligence, and I think one was quantum, are going to move to the United States. This is unacceptable, and we've heard about this already. Now, from a Canadian perspective as well, I know Mark Carney, as a banker, has immediately understood the need for a multilateral lending institution such as the DSRB as well. Because Canada has to increase spending considerably and has to invest in defence considerably. What I would say is, if you came to me in my multilateral bank instead of going to Europe, you would have that capital investment, no problem at all. Because we're already doing 2 things. Firstly, we have the guarantees we can take from the capital investment by nations in the bank. That provides us with the ability to turn round to a bank that we can then, a commercial bank for that amount of money, frankly, or several. And what we do, and we're already piloting it, and it is already happening, by the way, is we accredit those companies and take with a committee to look at their investment potential. That investment potential is then scored, and we go to the commercial banks who are asking for this service, not because of ESG problems and ethics and so on. Actually, a lot of the banks are coming up and asking because they don't understand where to start investing in defence, the commercial banks. And the funds, they don't understand because they haven't been doing it. So they come to us, we accredit it, and I can tell you now, you will get your billion, and I will get from the commercial banks. Is that all you want? Because they want to go for higher figures. There is, as I mentioned, 1% of this potential capital stack from top to bottom is in venture capital only, which is how we do this. I'm introducing, with a multilateral, even more that can keep industry where it needs to be, going back to Declan's point this morning, and keep them floating here and invest and keep them moving.
Okay, Commissioner?
Well, sometimes I'm very happy that I am Commissioner who is responsible to spend the money, not to find. So I will send your request to Piotr Serapin, my neighbor, who is responsible for budget and finances. But more seriously, we need to remember that really for you as industrialists or like investors, you need money to invest into production. We as Commission, we are investing into governments who needs to procure what you produce, So that is why I would suggest you, not now wait, you can wait for 1 billion, from us to come, but don't lose the momentum, because now my advice would be to you to go to the governments, convince them to take safe loans, very attractive, or even not 1 billion, the whole, 150 billion, and to spend really in procuring the products which you are producing. And there is very limited time. 2 months for governments, to notify us how much of those loans they want, and then 4 months to conclude the whole paperwork. So You know, it's plenty of job for both of us, you know.
Il nous reste 2 minutes. Une dernière.
So we have 2 minutes left. Maybe one last question here in front.
I'll give it back, I promise. Thank you. So the transformation in both in procurement, in the constitution of the armed forces, the cooperation throughout Europe is huge. And it requires a fundamental break with the nationalistic military-industrial policies that, as we speak today, are the normal way of managing military procurement. I have a question specifically for Kasia Ollongren, what her assessment is of the real willingness of European governments to break with this nationalistic military-industrial mode and get to work to make an overall master plan on the current and future military investments and the ways to constitute and to build a truly trans-European military industry.
Thank you very much. I think that's probably the last, most critical one, is the political will question. So you can wrap it up with that, Kasia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I think this is crucial, the political will to do this transformation. We all know the place we are in. It is, the world has become a very dangerous place. We also know that we can only tackle this together. So all the European countries need one another in the European Union, in the region of Europe, and in the NATO as the European pillar in NATO. And I just include Canada in that these days. So it is a big transformation, and we have everything that's been said. We have to stop the gold plating. We cannot think of this from a nationalist perspective. We have to think European, and we have to think in partnerships also with other countries who are on, let's say, on our side, also our partners in the Indo-Pacific. So, and then the last transformation is, of course, our way of thinking in procurement. So what we need to learn, and we need to learn very fast, is that we need to scale up quickly, to be able to produce quickly. We need, complex software in relatively simple capabilities, which is complete turnabout from what we were used to. We used to have very expensive and very complex systems that took years to produce, and we have to turn it around. So I think this is starting to resonate also with the political leadership, at least in some countries. I'm very hopeful, for instance, about Germany. And I think if Germany does take the lead in this, being such an important industrial country and also economically the motor of Europe, that could be very significant for the other countries. At the same time, I must say, I see still many countries where we have elections that are about completely other topics, and not about our security, not about the war in Ukraine, not about the threat landscape in the world. And I think this sense of urgency is necessary to create the right type of political leadership that we need. Perhaps I should end with one other positive sign, and that is, I think, the new, let's say, the renewed partnership between Europe and UK, and also the European Union and the UK. That is something that I believe is very hopeful, but I do agree that the political will be decisive. Because if political leaders do not dare to explain to their voters that this is a choice that we have to make, and that you cannot say, as some populist leaders say, that we will only spend more on defense if we also can spend more on healthcare and on housing and on social benefits, that is a lie. So we need leaders who dare to say that this has to be our first priority. Because otherwise we risk to lose everything that we have built in Europe since the Second World War.
Merci beaucoup. On me dit qu'on attend pour une toute petite dernière question, qui est apparemment très...
We still have time for one last little question. You can have the floor.
Building on the broad theme of this whole conference, that a constitutive part of the European identity is democracy, liberalism, and individuality. And in conjunction with recent Korea's arms sales to Poland, along with aforementioned Chinese and Russian military threat to Europe, could the political and military structure of the EU be expanded to go beyond just geographical borders of Europe to include liberal democracies such as Korea and Japan and possibly even Taiwan? And could this be part of the bold solution that Mr. Boyd mentioned?
Okay. Anybody wants to react to that?
I would remind that
we really wrap it up.
Yeah, the first security and defense partnerships which the European Union managed to sign previously were with Japan and South Korea. Now with Great Britain and Canada, we are moving successfully. Then also there is a wish from both sides to do the same with Australia. So we are exactly moving along those lines, and I think that this is really very crucial for not only for Europe but also for the whole world development, to have such kind of partnerships developed in a very clear way, where after that they are becoming very practical instruments also to expand into cooperation between of our industries and to build together what is very much needed.
Okay, merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. We haven't solved all of it, but we have here an agenda here, and we have a lot of work to do, and it's very urgent, as we've heard. So now to the next panel.